Good afternoon. I'm here with Frank Sosnowski, President of the State Council from 2002 to 2003. Thank you for your time.
You're
When
welcome.
you joined the State Council, were you a staff member, student, resident, or management?
I was a staff member back
Uh-huh.
in back in the nursing home. We had a very small staff, and there were just three pharmacists and a couple of technicians, and we serviced, about 400 beds in that nursing home, and working under the management of Richard Zaytoon, who was a previous president of the New York State Council. And Richard always was able to attend the annual assemblies, but being a very tiny department, not many of us could go all the time. So I always had to stay back, and I just stayed at the local stuff at the New York City level, not be able to get to the state meetings. But Richard always
Okay.
brought everything back for us to review, and told us all about it, wonderful times they had and all the professional things they did.
So you mentioned Richie. Who did you meet other than Richie that made you want to advance in the organization?
Oh my gosh, Ted, there's unbelievable amount of people that influenced me as far as wanting to see move the bell forward. And the most important guy was the guy who hired me into the Montefiore position, which was John Manzo. Uh, he came to me, and he's recruiting me for several years now, and I always watched John in the New York City Society, and I followed in his footsteps. And then he also took on the presidency right before you, I believe, and in 1999, and I really looked up to John and all the wonderful work he did. So it really wanted me to move forward. Besides that, there were some older old timers, I should say, that at the time were the godfathers of the pharmacy. People like Seymour Katz from Brookdale. I mean, it was just amazing what he accomplished in his career. And then Bernie Mel from Mount Sinai, your former boss, and who else? There was Gil Simon from Lenox Hill, I remember Gil very well, and he was very active. And I remember going back to Lenox Hill and seeing the first carousel type of equipment back in the 80s, and within his pharmacy. So he was heavy into the technology. They were all into moving the clinical practice forward and moving unit dose forward, moving the profession forward in general. So I admired all of them. They were all involved with this council. I didn't even know what the council was about until I went to the New York City Society a few times, and it was really a wonderful, wonderful experience, and just getting to meet so many people. I remember back then, Ted, there was so many more hospitals in New York City, and we
Yeah.
weren't all part of a major system. And there were so many drug companies. If you look at Pfizer today, there's probably 20 drug companies that were combined into that one company. Each one of them had a separate, unique methodology of marketing. So it was the society in New York City was so much larger. I came around from the days, Phil, Ted, when the Royals in New York City came together. I remember we were all in New York City, and I was with Barry Goldstein from NYU, and he really did a great job. And I just enjoyed working with him too. And he was very much a leader within the field. So most of my ties are all around the New York City area, watching everybody grow and build a society and build a profession and build a practice over time. So to answer your question, there's just so many people who influence me.
Yeah,
Even
no,
even Harvey Maldow. I mean, I remember Harvey being in
you're,
charge
you're
of
answering
so.
my you're
Mhm.
answering my next question,
Oh,
all of this. But that's
okay.
okay. Keep going because it was going to be how many of the previous past presidents did you know and what were they like? But keep going.
No, Harvey was fantastic. I just remember seeing his pharmacies on the West Side. It's just so unique. St. Luke, I mean, was it St. Luke's Roosevelt? And the one
Hmm.
upstairs and the one north of that also. So he had a great team of people working with him and great leaders working with him. We're all very active in the council. And I just remember going to so many of those meetings. And let me even go back further. Ray Gazinski, he was a wonderful leader from St. Vincent's, and I remember having a lot of city society meetings at St. Vincent's, and and attending a lot of those meetings and meeting so many great leaders in the profession. Deb Weibel also, she moved from Sinai. I mean, I'm from Lenox Hill. She took over the Beth Israel position, if you remember that. So she
Hmm.
was the leader of Beth Israel. She brought a lot of clinical activities in to the mix, and we had a good relationship. And to this day, I'm still really good friends with Deb Weibel. I'm actually pretty good friends with most of these people too, those who are still
Okay.
around. Um,
What challenges did you see as a member, board member, or president in the organization?
Challenges, Ted, there was always the thing about raising money, obviously, to keep the organization viable. I remember I was part of the Industrial Affairs Committee for many years and working under your tutelage also. You were the president right before me, so in a way, I was assigned to Industrial Affairs and just making sure getting funding coming in from the drug companies. They were always receptive to it, but you always had to work it and then make sure that they had access to the directors of pharmacy and making sure that they had access to just the professionals in general. Uh, Other challenges, I don't know what other questions you have, Ted, but our presidential years was loaded with challenges, if you recall. If you look at the time span, the date that we had, Ted, between you and I, it was 9/11. Do you remember that
Hmm.
time period?
Absolutely.
And it was a shocking experience in New York City. And I don't think, similar to COVID, where nobody came out, it was a different type of nobody coming out. You could come out. However, people were afraid to come out. I mean, the terrorist bombing was something else. And I remember very clearly getting together with the state council members around that time period and seeing how we could work and how we could help people and the challenge that we had that night, I remember calling you and calling others within the city. We were waiting for the ambulances to come to our hospitals, and they never really came. Uh,
Hmm.
and a recap of that whole time period in our lifespan was just amazing, and what we dealt with for the next couple of months and throughout the entire year that came after. So your transitions from you dealing with that to me coming back to the tail end of that. And I remember we recognized a few people from, I guess, the hospital down in that Wall Street area. I guess it's
Hmm.
now affiliated with Columbia Presbyterian now. And a few people that were working in there too, the directors there, and also the people from Columbia Presbyterian. We recognized it, and I remember talking about them in my speech and saying that the world was going to change forever. I also remember at that time period, ASHP, Ted was working on these emergency medicine crash carts. Remember, we always had them.
Hmm.
However, the focus was so much more that the ASHP was coming out with binders, and all the companies were coming out with different type of booklets of what you should have in an event of an emergency like this. So that was a big to do for us in our presidential terms of how do we handle with emergency situations within hospital
Absolutely.
policies. You know,
Mm.
and we lived through a bunch of those. So it was interesting. The floods in New York City, the COVID thing, and so there's a lot going on with that. Okay, Ted, go
All
ahead.
right. Memberships always seems to be an issue.
Mhm.
You remember what members wanted during your presidency?
What they wanted, Ted, it was a little bit different back then. When I go to local chapters now, they're really more of a social event around having camaraderie and networking. I guess it was the same, but it seems like the chapters right now are trying to put on too many. And I feel like it's overkill. I remember back when we were president, we always try to do the mid-year clinical, right? Try to get those people to come to those meetings. The challenge was to get people to take time off from work to go to that, and that was a
Mhm.
tough thing for people to do. I just remember always the membership going to the schools of pharmacy as president. I remember visiting several of the schools and doing some talks with the student groups. In addition to that, just as a president, I made it a challenge for myself to try to get to every chapter. I think I was following in your footsteps, Ted. I think you tried to do that also when you were president. And I remember uh, getting to Royals, getting to the Westchester Society, getting up to the Albany area and the central New York area, and never made it up to Buffalo. Western Society, but I always wanted to, but we kind of was a little bit of a distance of a travel. And talking to the groups and being able to address the groups at each one of their meetings, just telling them the importance of the organization and the needs of the membership, and growing the membership. And we always, from this day on, I still hear the same things at all the meetings, that our future are the students that we have. So the students at all of the colleges were a major target for us, and we put on a lot of programs around them. We worked issues around membership fees and waiving membership fees and remember them to come to meetings for free, or discounted membership when they grew. So memberships were always a big challenge for us.
Okay.
hmm
How often did the board meet? What type of meetings were they? Face-to-face, conference call, snail mail? Was it organized? Was there camaraderie? What do you remember about the board meetings?
Wow. I I can remember traveling with you many a times up to the board meetings, and they were mostly
Remember,
in
remember,
the
you don't
Al
want to say anything.
yeah, mostly in the Albany area. And, and at the time, Deb Feinberg was the executive director, so she organized things very well. And I have to tell you, that position was, for me, was probably one of the most uh, profound areas of keeping me organized on a regular basis. I just started a fairly new job at the hospital. It was overwhelming. I asked administration if they minded me being the president, because it's going to take time away from work, and they were very supportive about it, Montefiore. However, I remember just trying to bring everything together, new concepts, new ideas, and constantly meeting with the legal and public affairs type of things that were going on at the time. Uh, we were pretty well organized. I remember having agendas. I mean, I was going to pull them out for this interview, but I didn't get a chance to look into my garage or into my old archives. But I definitely have a whole slew of things. I remember also, Ted, uh, the internet was starting around there really heavily. Remember? Uh,
Hmm.
we 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 didn't have a real strong internet-based membership list or even directors of pharmacy lists back then. So we were trying to use that technology to lure more members in and to make sure that we used it to our benefit. And I remember Ted, the journal, the Blue Journal that you were the editor of. I looked forward to that journal all the time, and it had great articles in it. What was happening locally, not nationally, but what the local hospitals were doing. I mean, when I say local, meaning state. What our comrades all over the place were doing within the state and within the organization. Um, the meetings were 2 days, if I recall. We went in on a Friday night or even a Thursday night, I believe, and then we would meet all day Friday and then leave a Saturday sometimes, and they were very well organized. Each person brought up all their issues, and we went through each one of the different sections of the organization, and they each had a chance to report out, and we accepted those reports. And things I liked the most was getting ready for the annual assembly and the different issues, even if different issues around the annual assembly. What we were going to say at the House, what was going to be discussed, what political hot topic was happening at the time. And I had a lot happening during your and my time, those 2 years going in. And mainly, if you recall, if you're going to ask me what, I don't know if this is going to be a question or not, but at the time, there were three major things that we were trying to accomplish politically and legislatively within the state as pharmacy leaders. The first one was out there many, many years, and we're still pushing it forward, was immunizations. Pharmacists didn't have the right to immunize back then. We were
Hmm.
just that was just coming to being in 2000 uh, and 2001, which educational courses, how we're going to get this to be pushed through the legislation. And then I remember at the time also there was a portion of pharmacists being diabetic educators. we had legislation that were two together, and we had to split them out because we said, we should keep the diabetes away, separate from the immunizations, because if we put them all into a big bucket, the legislation won't understand what we're trying to accomplish with this. So we did separate it out, and lo and behold, be careful what you wish for. Pharmacists are mandated to immunize now many of our ambulatory settings. So it's a good move forward for the practice. And now that we have all those immunizations, adult immunizations, it's great to see that some of the footwork that we did back in the early days of the 2000s were coming to fruition now, and it's just normal piece of the practice right now. The biggest one, Ted, if you recall, and it was going on for many, many years, was collaborative drug therapy management. Those were the buzzwords for years. I remember Joe Medicis pounding the pavements with Tom Lombardi, you, myself, and Deb, and who was our lobbyist? I forget his name. Oh, oh gosh.
Harry.
Oh, it'll come to me, but Harry, no, I forget, but he was a really savvy man. He knew how to move around the political arenas. I recalling going to have to go to a meeting in the city at Assemblyman's Coleman's reception, and waiting online to give a donation to his PAC fund, and making sure the pharmacists were recognized at that reception. The other thing I remember very clearly was going to meet Governor Pataki
Yeah,
in
I
Staten
actually have
Island.
that picture.
Yeah, Staten Island, and we went to talk to him also about trying to get collaborative drug therapy management. And it's very difficult during a Christmas holiday type of party to sit and talk politics, but we were able to at least touch base with him and show him that pharmacy organizations are alive in New York State. And so we were laying some groundwork way back when for this collaborative drug therapy management stuff. The biggest thing I remember, Ted, with this was trying to align with the medical society, the State Society of New York, Medical Society of New York, and the challenges that we had were their PAC fund was just so big. I remember them publishing how much money they had, and it was in the $7 million in their PAC fund, and we were dealing with 30,000. So I mean, the same thing with the Nurses Association. It's really difficult if you don't have the PAC dollars there. And I think that was a big push for you and I, Ted, was to try to push the PAC funds forward and making people understand the value of their donations to a PAC fund. Uh, but I recall going into the Medical Society building with Joe Medicis and our lobbyist and a few other people, and remember waiting for such a long time and what we were going to say to these guys. And we had a PowerPoint already and a pitch to go to talk about what pharmacists could do as far as collaborative drug therapy. And they made us wait for such a long time. And about 45 minutes later, we walked into this conference room, and I'll never forget it. There was this condescending president of that organization with his very fancy Armani suit and his pinky ring, and he responded to us, all right, gentlemen, let me hear what you have to say and what do you want, and then tell us how you practice your craft in New York. And I remember Joe, his ears were burning and he was flaring, and I just I'll never forget walking out of that meeting, and he gave us like maybe 10, 15 minutes after I was making us wait 45 minutes. So it was funny trying to discuss collaborative drug therapy with the medical society. Some some were very much in tune. Being in
Hmm.
the hospital where we were, in the New York City area, where we had a pharmacist involved with a lot of medical management, infectious disease, IV to PO type of things, and switching a lot of preparations or even dosing by protocol also. It was pretty commonplace for us in the hospital setting, but in the ambulatory setting, it wasn't out there too extensively yet. I remember tobacco cessation programs coming about. Remember, they were the patches were
Hmm.
coming out. The nicotine patches were coming at that time too, and it was really challenging to move that needle. And every year we moved it a little bit, a little bit, a little bit, a little bit, and finally I got to give credit to Kim Zamet and Lee Driscoll Dwyer. As we proceeded to the State Board of Pharmacy, we moved the bullet even further along, and finally it went into legislation. So I would say that was probably 20 years in the making, because the people before us were also talking.
More than 20.
More than 20, yeah.
More than 20, because I still remember in 1995 when Harvey was the president and talking about
Hmm.
collaborative drug therapy management.
Hmm.
Or at that time it was
MTM,
MTM.
yeah. Mhm.
Mm.
And the other thing, Ted, that we worked on for a while, we talked a lot about technicians too,
Mhm.
making them part of the organization back in the 2000s. And I remember a few of them gathering together, and we recognized them at certain events, and that was good. And a lot of a lot of good times with a lot of good, successful people, and from all over the state. And I have to say one thing about this organization. Some of my best friends to this day are still part of this organization, and I grew up with them, and I learned everything that I can from them. And one thing about being president of the New York State Council was recognition for myself as a professional. And I always tell people that, there's something special about New York and this society, and the fact that I felt at any given moment, if I was in a bind and I needed a favor or a policy or some kind of question answered that I didn't know, I could pick up the phone, and I knew enough of pharmacy directors in the state of New York that anybody would have picked up the phone and they would have answered that question and been supportive to my needs. And the same way when we were running the society, it was a camaraderie that was unbelievable that we had, and even going to the House, it was. I remember my first House of Delegates. It was a little nerve-wracking for me, being a delegate for the first time from New York City. And my gosh, that was frightening. And watching people like Seymour and uh, and Bernie and Kurt Kleiman getting up and really going into deep, heavy discussions about end of life treatments, or even fertility drugs, or even abortion medications. And those were such heavy topics, and the debates that took place at those houses were just amazing. And the organization was really well organized and well run. Not saying it's not now. It's definitely a little bit different, because we have more systems as opposed to tiny little hospitals around. So I think less people have the ability to get to these meetings. And one thing I would suggest to any new president coming in is, if we could build up that House of Delegates again, and not only have the delegates show up, but bring the membership there to hear what happens at these meetings, and the ability to get up and speak, and to speak your mind. One of the things I noticed, Ted, uh, as president, I always wanted to bring back stuff from ASHP, all the topics that were going on at ASHP. If you recall, I don't know if you went, but I went my
Mhm.
presidential years. I had the ability to go to ASHP to represent New York State as their president, as our president of an
Mhm.
affiliated state.
One of the 5 delegates that we had.
Yeah, and I literally, no, not at the delegates. This was a president retreat.
Oh,
So
yeah.
it was just as president, you went to this meeting. And my first time, I got to sit next to Kathy Schultz, and we kibitzed through the whole meeting. We had a great time. We got to be real good friends, and till this day, I could still say Kathy's a good friend, and she worked her way all the way up to the presidency of the
Mhm.
ASHP organization. So it's just the small times of networking and listening was amazing, and some really great professionals within that organization, ASHP. And I remember trying to look at all the council's activities and bringing it back to the state council meeting, and trying to ensure that everybody that is in New York State understands what's going on at the national level too. So it was a lot of fun times, and I'll tell you, going to all those meetings as a delegate, and even just attending the meetings with all you guys and from our state, and it was just a really life learning experience for us.
Okay.
Uh, hey Ted, another challenge I remember during the presidency for you and I was, if you remember the Mid Hudson chapter fading?
Sure.
It was falling apart. And you asked me about membership, and I said I remember that one. You and I trying to make that come back to life.
Hmm.
And they were starting to meet with the Pisney people, so they would come. They were the first ones that trying to bring that togetherness with retail pharmacies and the hospitals together and bringing those type of memberships together. I don't think that's the way the organization wanted to go back then.
No.
We didn't want to really blend, but they had such poor attendance at their meetings that the organization was falling apart, the Mid Hudson. So I remember driving to Poughkeepsie and trying to get to meet with them and have conversations about how we could strengthen
CIA.
their meeting. And I think they kind of joined to the Westchester Society at that point, and a
Well,
lot of
actually, they split up. The Mid Hudson went to either Albany, which is
Albany, right,
northeastern,
right,
or Westchester, depending
Westchester,
on where they were.
where they
And
were,
they had
yeah.
that choice.
Hmm. And I see it's trying to come back now. I believe right
Yeah.
now they're starting to bring the whole organization back, which is a good sign. Many more people involved. Ted, the other challenges that we had at the time, there were four College of Pharmacy in New York, remember?
Hmm.
And out of nowhere, new ones were blossoming. And the Practice Act was changing, the methodology of teaching pharmacists were changing. The PharmD was becoming just a normal thing. Uh,
Standard.
and it was the standard in the practice. And, a lot of us with the BSs still with master's degrees, and we weren't part of that PharmD thing, but the colleges were really pushing the PharmD advancement program, where you could go back as a BS and go for your PharmD.
Mhm.
And the colleges were also talking about, the competition maybe coming in. I mean, I remember Binghamton being discussed. I remember a few of other ones being discussed, and they were going to be a threat to some of the four colleges that were currently in existence. So that was interesting to listen to. Not only New York State, but the whole country was expanding their footprint around colleges. Um, then, Ted, the other things we came across were staff shortages too. Remember? I
Hmm.
remember getting in front of a whole large organization and talking to them about staff shortages, and everybody was getting cars from Rite Aid and CVS at the time, and saying these times are not going to last forever. Everybody wanted their bonuses and their sign-ons, and everything that was happening was so ridiculous that we were so short-staffed, and so that was a challenges within the organization around that time period when we were presidents or past presidents. So a lot of stuff happened to it during our time period. And I have to say that, we weathered the storm.
Okay.
Uh, the profession is moving forward. It continues to move forward. I continue to talk to the residents about where we're going in the future.
I have another question for you. This
Okay.
is usually, well, actually, I have a couple more, but generational changes. When you started, did you feel you needed to work your way up to the presidency? Do you feel new members will want to pay their dues based upon the philosophy of having a bigger balance of personal time versus work time? And will these new members be able to move the council forward?
Wow, Ted, that was a profound question. The fact that it hits right to my soul. I remember being asked to serve on a committee of New York City Society, and it was a dinner dance chair committee. So I worked with a couple of people on a dinner dance, and that was an honor. I mean, it was like to be asked to do something like that was incredible, and I didn't ever expect to be president, to say the least. So you had to work your way up, and it was really, and you had to be selected. There was always a lot of people on the ballot, and you had to be recognized. And in order to get recognized, you had to do some outstanding stuff within the board. And working from the New York City Society and moving my way up, you slowly said, man, maybe one of these days I could do something on the state level. And it was a privilege to become recognized to become a director at large on the state level or even at the city level was a it was a wonderful privilege. And you weren't entitled to it. You had to be voted in. And you had to show that you were really a caring individual. And there were a lot of politics involved with that, and it just didn't happen overnight. Now, I remember when I first got asked to be president of the New York City Society, I my wife and I were trying to have children, and my wife finally got pregnant. And that was back in the 90s, obviously. But I asked her, I said, listen, they're asking me to run for president, and I don't know if I'll ever get the opportunity to be asked again. So I said, this is my one and only chance to take on this presidency. You know, they'll bypass me, and be rightfully so, Ted. I have to tell you, I was working in long-term care. It wasn't really a major hospital in the New York
Mhm.
City area. So, you know, you're not really a big shot or, you know, a big face in the crowd when you have all places like Montefiore, Mount Sinai, and Sloan, and all the other biggies out there with really world-renowned pharmacy directors that were really up on cuff, you know, doing Harvey A. K. Whitney Award winners. And here I am, just a lone pharmacy director at a New York City long-term care facility. Will I ever be asked to be president again if I pass this opportunity? So my wife said, do what's in your heart. So pharmacy has always been in my heart. So I have to say that I took on the challenge, and needless to say, after a time period, you know, I followed in your footsteps, Johnny's footsteps, and a whole bunch of other people. We worked together and we worked collaboratively together to move the city society forward. And then we all kind of transitioned up to the state level. And it was an honor to be at the state level. And, you know, we're following the footsteps of these leaders from the profession, you know, the Seymour Katz's and then you know the Tom O'Briens and you know those type of individuals who were way up and establishing performing, and Bernie Mel performing and doing residency programs, doing national circuit, and many lectures and all of these publications they were doing. So it was to be with that type of presence around you was fantastic. Yeah, it's you know right now what I'm seeing, Ted, is these young great, excellent pharmacists that are coming in. Don't get me wrong, they're clinically well versed, they are energetic. However, they get pushed into presidential positions and never had any of the background of what takes place to get to where you need to be to get an understanding of how the operation works and what the organization's all about. And you know, it's a transition, slow transition. You just can't be thrown on top all the time. And I think what's happening, this whole generation, everybody wants a medal, and everybody wants to be in charge, and they don't know the benefit of taking it slow and working the whole crowd and understanding how the building blocks work behind an organization. Because it's not only about pharmacy; it's just about life also. You can't jump the shark all the time because you're going to piss people off along the way. You really need to network, make friends, build camaraderie, build friendship, and build a team around you that will make you successful. Remember, I always said I'm not the smartest guy in the room, but building people around you who are a lot smarter than you make you look real good too. So, and that's been my whole career. Yes, Ted, to answer your question, I think they are pushing these people into high level positions on the city level or in the Royals or anything without getting a real good flavor of what the rest of the organization is. Now, with that being said, I will say I've been going to the New York City meetings, I've been going to the Westchester meetings recently, and they have been very, very successful. So successful that I'm thinking that the chapters are becoming stronger than the full state organization. And I think we got to reemphasize as an organization that the chapters make up the state organization. It's not the other way around. All right. And so we have to understand how we could continue to build that building block to a state organization. Because once after the state is over, to get more presidents like Lee coming forward and wanting to be at a national level and represent New York State, we just can't take people from the city chapters and putting up in ASHP. because that'll be the next thing they want, right? Instead of
Mm-hmm.
working their way through what's going on in the state and what's going on at a delegates level, they just want to be thrown into a position of authority and without understanding what's happening, and that's going to make the organization collapse. Um, Ted, I remember you're requesting that you do a historical thing for the organization on how our organization was built and the PowerPoint that you had together. And at my first meeting, I remember asking you as the past president to make sure you you put that forward and explain to everybody that was coming up on the board of directors at the time, how the organization was formed. What was the history of it? What does each board member do? How do we build, how are those building blocks put together? And I think to that day, it still should be somewhat, people should understand how things get organized as opposed to just jumping in the fire and being put into a leadership position where you don't really know how you got there. You
Mm-hmm. Okay. Final question, and then I'll give it to you for any final nuggets.
Mhm.
Annual assemblies. When you became president, did you feel the annual assembly was chaotic, too busy, too sedate, or you felt like a chicken with your head running around without your head?
Uh, Ted, well, I'll go back to my where I started before, saying there were many more hospitals, there were many more drug companies, uh, and the organization was flourishing at the time. I would say we were doing pretty well. I remember having 38, 40 corporate sponsors and, different levels of sponsorship. And they were everybody was taking the pretty high levels, and these biotech companies were just starting to come about. So, and everybody wanted to sit at the table. So no, it was huge. I remember giving my introductory speech, and I looked out, and your knees are shaking, and your hands are holding the podium to try to keep steady. And then after a while, you just took command of the moment, and you gave your speech, and you got through it. And I remember putting the two slideshows together because PowerPoint wasn't around at that point. They had slides still, and unbelievable. and I remember rattling off everything I was going to do. And there was so many things within my speech that I wanted to get done. And I remember coming off that meeting, Harvey Maldau the next day, and he said, "You did a great job last night," but he goes, "I just want to give you one word of warning." He says, "You're trying to do too much. Try to stick to just one or two simple, basic things to move it forward. And don't try to do everything that you said yesterday." And it kind of stuck with me, saying, "Yeah, you're probably right, because before you blink your eyes, after an annual assembly, which is always in April, you're into June and summer starts rolling. So your real presidential piece doesn't really start rolling until September." I remember the mid-year was being discussed at that time. And and things fly so fast, and the organization is no time does waits for no one. So you really need to look forward and say, how am I going to organize this portion of my life, and what can I get accomplished in these 3 years that I'm going to be involved with this organization? You know what, Ted? 3 years turned into what, 25 years for us, almost 30 years. And so even though you're out of it, you're not really ever out of it, because we love this organization. You know that. You wouldn't be sitting here with me if we didn't. And if one thing I would say for the young people coming up, yeah, maybe Harvey was right. Try to look at one or two things to get accomplished and try to focus on those things, and let your board work for you and get a lot of the other things done. The legislative stuff will always be there. There's always be politics in around. And we got to build bridges. And one of the things that I wanted to do when I was president, which never really happened, was to get a nurse pharmacy gap together and have a meeting with nursing. And what I rapidly learned when I was trying to put that together was, you think pharmacy's big? Nursing is colossal. There are so many different organizations within our state for nursing. So you really couldn't capture everybody. But probably we could start with the PAs and the nurses again and try to get a collaborative meeting together with them. I think, Ted, the organization is still strong. When I listened to the meeting last week, the financials look great. I think the participation of the young generation, sounds like I'm an old guy now. I guess I am, but the participation of the young generation is really happening. I live in the walls of the great Kurt Kleinman, who sat in this desk right here, and his philosophy, along with Bernie's and the others greats, were that we lead by showing them that we're involved also. So my philosophy when I interview anybody for a job here is to tell them that you will be involved with the New York State Council. You will be a member of the New York State Council and you would get involved with it. And we live and breathe that within Montefiore. And it's so true, because if you look at all the people that went through this organization, through this department, and have become leaders in one way or another. We have chapter presidents, we have leads all over the place. So I continue to push that philosophy, and I'll do that until the day I leave Montefiore. And I'll continue to do it afterwards, just like you're doing it now, Ted. So I think we need more people like that, advocating for the organization and pushing the organization forward. And it's exciting times. I mean, I get worried about where we're going in the future. Not so much New York State Council, but just the whole profession. I look at AI hitting us, and I'm saying, what is it going to take for robotics to take over what we're doing every day? There's always going to be that human factor that we need, but it's kind of scary when you see what's happening with AI. And I'm really looking forward to this annual assembly to listen to more about AI. And I'm also looking forward to the summer meeting that ASHB is going to have, because it's going to be a focus on AI. I sent one of my managers, IT managers, to an AI conference in University of UConn the other day, and he came back and gave me a whole rundown of what everybody's planning with AI, and it's pretty scary. And what does it mean for our profession? We'll just have to work around it, because at the time, remember, we weren't giving vaccines. We weren't doing CDTM, and we're doing them now, and it'll morph into something. We just got to keep up with the education and keep our young people involved. And so if I had to say one thing, we have to continue to push the schools to stay in touch with the council. And you know what? Our colleagues in Pisney, I think that organization could use a little boost also. And I think our organization could be a strong advocate for the profession, and we could move together in unison, because what we're seeing is a lot of activities in the ambulatory setting within our own health systems now. Specialty pharmacies, ambulatory pharmacy, CDMT practice, CDTM practices. It's moving the needle to a different spectrum, and moving more out of the inpatient side and moving more onto the outpatient side, but not forgetting the inpatient. Obviously, it's getting more and more complex, the drugs that are coming in here now. And the whole healthcare system is changing, and we got to keep up with it. And one way to keep up with it is to continue to network with your buddies like this. And I see the directors of pharmacy meetings that they put on now. Bob DiGregorio did a fine thing, putting together every monthly meetings and getting on those meetings. Really, you share ideas. It's really great. And getting back in person again at Toro College was really fantastic also. So we got to continue those type of things. And Bob did ask me to do the directors roundtable at this meeting, at this annual assembly, which I haven't done in a while, but I'm excited about it. That we'll see. We'll bring back the old forum where I'll play. What's his name? Joe Donahue. Who's the guy who he used to do the talk show? And we'll move around and get those questions asked and see how people get engaged at that meeting. And it's always fun at the directors roundtable. So I hope a lot of people show up for that. So Ted, in closing, I know we're getting to the end. You got any other questions?
No, I was just about to say, you can close it off now, and if you want to sit and talk for a few more minutes, that's great.
Yeah, and again, Ted, thanks you for taking on this historian role, because there's moments like this, and I'm sure you talk to other people who could give you more and more crisper dates and times and everything that they did. But it was a long journey and it was a fun journey. And when I look back, Ted, I never regret anything that I ever learned from this organization. They led me in the right direction. I met some great, wonderful people, which I could say are some of my best buddies to this day, and they will be until I die. All right.
Absolutely.
Thank you,
Yeah.
guys.